Where is your heart? What is it that fills your heart, moves it? We'd like to think that we focused our life, our attention, our thoughts, our energies on God. But so often we know there are other things, man-made things, the stuff of life, that begins to cloud our vision, begins to cloud our focus, and takes a sizable chunk of who we are. Think of these Israelites that we hear about in the first reading. They had just been freed from slavery, horrific situation in Egypt, freed by the very power of God. And already, as they begin to journey across the desert, they shift their eyes to something different. Somehow this relationship with God wasn't enough. So they have to make their own false god, a molten image, a little trinkety cow. And that's what they were going to sell to worship. So some material object takes the very center of their lives instead of the very worship of God. And God is angry. God desired nothing more than a relationship with this people, to create a deep sense of unity with them. And he's going to destroy them. But it's Moses who stays his hand. It's Moses who talks him into mercy as he remembers those who have gone before and all who have tried, and the faithfulness of some of the community. And it is mercy that becomes the centerpiece from the very first chapters of the very first book in the Old Testament, the centerpiece of God's relationship with us as he strives and longs for a deep interpersonal relationship with us individually and as a people. And it is mercy that Paul talks about in his letter to Timothy. He's reminding Timothy that Paul himself required the most mercy because he was one of the worst. And in his own life, he hunted down and killed Christians before he himself was captured up in a relationship with Jesus after Jesus' resurrection and transformed into the final apostle, the one who brought the good news to the Gentiles. But Paul is saying, it is mercy that has saved me, the mercy of Christ. It's the same Christ that we see in this gospel reading we have. When I sat down with the staff this week, as we do, praying in Alexia Divina on Monday through the reading, I have to admit, when I first looked at the reading, I was like, ooh, it's a long one. And it is a long one. 3 separate parables about mercy. 3 separate parables about God and about love. And it's important for us to recognize that all 3 of them are a response to the opening situation, a situation that it might be easy for us to gloss over. But we hear that it's the tax collectors and sinners who are gathering around Jesus, who are clamoring to spend time with him, and Jesus is eating with them. And what do we hear about the Pharisees and the scribes? They were complaining. How dare he, eating with sinners? And it is that group that Jesus addresses all 3 parables to. This first one about the sheep. And what man wouldn't leave 99 sheep in the wilderness to go in search of the one? No one. Not in the wilderness. Yes, shepherds would go off and find one that had strayed. But it is only the intense love of God seeking us out, picking us up and putting us on his shoulders and bringing us home. That is the image that we must see when we hear that Jesus is eating and drinking with the reprehensible. And the woman sweeping out her house, this one's a little bit easier for us to grasp. We maybe lost 1/10 of her wealth. Of course she turned on the lights. and swept the house. But like the man who had picked up the sheep and brought it home, called the neighbors to rejoice, that which has been lost is found. And then this long parable that we are all so familiar with about the two sons and the father. And the younger son who has spent in a life of debauchery, anything that his father had given him. He had essentially taken the life he was given and walked away from it, taking the resources that weren't really his and spitting in his father's face as to what he was hoping for him to be and to do. But yet we hear it is the father who is standing on the hillside looking out. It's the father who spied him coming from a long way off, who ran to greet him and welcome him home. Is the father who, hearing from the son that I deserve nothing, returned him to a status of son. When we hear these readings, they should tweak us, for they speak to several different issues that are important. God does not excuse the sin. He does not excuse the sin of his people as they make a molten image to replace him. Paul does not excuse, nor does Jesus excuse Paul's murderous behavior. They forgive it and welcome the sinner back into the fold. The father is painfully aware of what his son has done and the life he has led. And on the son's return, simply forgives him. And he doesn't forgive him because he's sorry. We know why the boy returned. He was hungry. But it was that first step back into the fold that allowed the father to say, "Come on in. Be one of us once again." And transformative grace takes root in the heart. But we know there's another son. And Jesus is talking to the Pharisees who complained. And he said, here's the one who righteously says, look, I have always done what you've asked me to do. Always been who you wanted me to be, and I have been faithful to God and the commandments, and you've given me nothing. Reminds me of one time when I told my father that proudly that I had actually done some little task I was supposed to do every week and rarely ever did. And he looked at me and said, am I supposed to applaud? All you've done is what you're supposed to do. In life, as my father reminded me, welcome to adulthood. But as adults, we are called to make some difficult choices, not the least of which is to be someone who says to those who are erring, to those who are sinning, who are falling away from the path, with love and charity, I think you need to reassess. We have to be those who are willing to speak to those who are sinning and say, stop. But we're also called to be like God, to have the heart of our Heavenly Father, and not be small and bitter and mean and count who got what, but to rejoice when one repentant sinner comes home. Sometimes it'll be through our efforts and our outreach. Other times it'll be more through our prayer. And sometimes it'll just be the grace of God. But each and every time we are called to rejoice. What struck me this week as I was reading through this gospel time and time again was the fattened calf. I would like to believe, we're not told why. Why was there a fattened calf? I believe that the father always had a calf being fattened so that it could be slaughtered for celebration. The father was always ready to celebrate his son's return. May we be mindful that we have a responsibility to challenge and care for others through how we speak to human sin. But we have a deeper responsibility to celebrate the return of those who have fallen away and to welcome them back with great joy. Because step by step, in little ways, every time someone turns back to our Heavenly Father, we are one step closer to all creation being united once again in the love of his hand.